we're the flagship program in this state, right? And
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to another episode of the Raw Prospect Podcast. My name is Amy Nixon. To my right, that is my co-host, Michael Ween. And tonight, we are doing our second edition in a row of a football gut check, where we will each take turns asking each other questions from anything football related, meaning NFL, college, or even in the springtime, XFL a little bit. If that sounds interesting to you, we have a lot more of this coming. So make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like on the video as well. We really would appreciate it. And before we get into it, I got to introduce my co-host, Michael. How you doing tonight?
I'm fantastic. It's Tuesday, December 10th, 8:47 p.m. We're 2 weeks away from Christmas, so happy holidays to everybody. The college football playoff is here, ladies and gentlemen. The games don't take place this weekend, but the Longhorns, who, as you guys know, if you've been following the podcast for a while, Amy and I both heavily support, will host Clemson next Saturday in round one of the college football playoff, a game hosted in DKR. 4 games, 4 very important playoff games next weekend to start the first ever 12-team playoff. We'll get into some of that tonight, and then we'll also get into some NFL happenings from not only over the weekend, but as we approach week 15 and go into the last 4 weeks of the regular season, some playoff discussion as well. I'm really excited. There's a lot to get into. So let's go ahead and jump right into the football discussion.
Yeah, let's do it. All right, first one is, if you're Quinn Ewers, are you one, entering the NFL draft, or 2, staying in college and transferring so that Arch can be filled into your spot? And if the answer is number 2, then which schools would be on your radar to transfer to?
If I'm Quinn Ewers right now in his shoes, I'm entering the NFL draft. Whether I'm told I'm a possible late day 1 pick or a day 2 pick, I'm taking the chance on my talent right now, my arm talent, and everything that I've done and worked for so far in my college career, and just going ahead to the NFL because of my injury history. I don't believe coming back next year with another program is really going to help me elevate my draft stock all that much, when I know that deep down in my heart, even though I probably wouldn't say it out loud, and Quinn's a pretty, I would say, well-spoken but soft-spoken individual. And he's talked about and been pretty open about how he feels after games. Sometimes he has said, I'm not 100%. I think he's pretty open and honest about that. But I think deep down, he probably thinks to himself, man, I've just been dealing with all these injuries, and I might as well just go try to get my money now rather than risk injury coming back next year. I think, as Quinn Ewers, my heart is with the Texas Longhorns. I don't want to play for anyone else, so I'm going to the NFL draft and seeing where the chips fall. What's your opinion on it?
I think there's definitely an argument for, yes, the injury history. But for me personally, I look at Quinn Ewers and I definitely feel like there's meat left on the bone. When looking at his play against these higher level opponents, at times there's running ability that's yet to be tapped into, as well as processing defenses and just a little bit of just that pocket presence and poise in the pocket that I think can be developed. I think he has it in him because we've seen him do it before. You look at the Alabama game last year, that's the one that everyone points to. And at various points in his career, he's had performances that were just straight up top notch. You look at even the Michigan game this year. So for me, I think Quinn should consider transferring. I don't know if he will. If I were to predict what he's going to do, I would probably predict that he's going to enter the draft for all the reasons that you just laid out. But if I were in Quinn Ewers' shoes, I think there's still talent that I would feel that I hadn't tapped into, and I would explore my options.
I think the great thing about today in college football is he can use his leverage. He can enter the transfer portal and enter the draft, see where things fall after, Senior Bowl, Combine, whatever, all those pre-draft workouts, see where his stock is. And then if he decides, you know what, I think my options are probably better in the spring portal, because you need to get in the portal by a certain time, but there's no timeline for when you have to actually declare or make a commitment to a school. The portal opened yesterday and it closes on the 27th or the 28th, but you don't have to come out of the portal at that time period. So he could, in theory, enter the portal, see what's out there on the NIL front, evaluate his option in the NFL after going through pre-draft workouts in the combine. If he decides the NFL is the best route because of he likes what he hears, he can stay in the NFL draft and pull his name out of the portal. If he doesn't, he can pull his name out of the draft by a certain time and transfer to another school. I think that's probably, if he's really torn on that, if he's really on the fence about what he thinks he needs to do, that's probably the best option for him.
Okay. Yeah, I would probably agree with that. Okay. Interesting conversation there with that first question. Go ahead and ask me your first question.
Okay. Let's do this one first. This is a question I came up with that I'm actually kind of excited to ask you. It's kind of an NFL and college question. And it has to do with the transfer portal. If you're an NFL general manager right now, which of the following college quarterbacks, all of which are now in the transfer portal, are you most excited to scout next year in their new destination? Here are the four options. Malik Murphy, a former Texas quarterback who played this year at Duke, he's in the portal. Connor Wigman from Texas A&M is in the portal. Miller Moss from USC, he's also in the portal. And Jackson Arnold, the Oklahoma freshman, is in the portal. Which of those quarterbacks, as an NFL general manager or NFL scout, whichever role you want to take on, are you most intrigued to scout next year and wherever their new destination might be?
I think all four are very interesting in different ways. But if I had to choose, I think I would lean towards Jackson Arnold. And I know that might be a hot take. I'm not sure. I think it just depends on how you view him getting benched this year at Oklahoma. But I still do believe in Jackson Arnold's ability as a former 5-star quarterback. He just has to really put the work in this summer and just develop as a decision maker. That's the biggest thing. He has the ability to move already and has some playmaking ability. It's just a matter of putting it all together. And I would lean towards him just because he's the youngest out of this group. So I think Arnold has the most time to kind of get it right. And if I'm an NFL scout, I'm definitely keeping an eye on it.
I think all four are, just in terms of watching and scouting next year in their new destination, not necessarily drafting. We're not saying you're going to draft them. I think all four are fascinating. For me, the Connor Wigman stuff really comes down to how durable are you going to be? How consistent are you going to be? Because we haven't seen that yet. I think he's probably my answer because he's also a former 5-star. And I really believe there's something in there. It wasn't there at A&M. Maybe it can be there somewhere else. But I'm also obviously interested in Malik Murphy because of the ties to Texas. And that guy is just loaded with potential. And he had a really good year at Duke. He needs to cut down on the turnovers. That's still a problem. But for his first full year starting at Duke, it was a pretty damn good year. They went 9-3. So I think that kid's got a bunch of charisma. I think he's a pretty good leader. Everyone speaks very highly of him just as a person off the field. But his arm talent, all the talent that guy has, if you could kind of develop that for maybe 1 or 2 more years, that could be really interesting from a draft standpoint, because he's probably got the most, I don't know, out of those guys, which one has the most like prototypical NFL quarterback body, do you think?
I mean, it would probably be between Wigman and Murphy, but I would lean towards Murphy, given the direction the league is going. It's going towards quarterbacks who can run, and Wigman is a little bit more of a pocket passer. He can run, but he doesn't too often.
Yeah. All right. You're back up. I think that was an interesting question.
All right. Next one for you. Okay. If you are an NFL GM, just off scouting Drew Aller in the Big Ten Championship, what part of the draft are you comfortable drafting him if he declares? So early first round, like late first round, early second, so on and so forth. Where would you be looking?
For Drew Aller, if he comes out this year, my gut feel for his talent, and he's massively talented, and that showed in the Big Ten championship game. I'm saying mid to late second round is where I'd start to feel comfortable drafting him. I don't know if I can say first round, but you love the arm talent. He's shown more this year than he ever has before. He's pretty mobile and athletic, something not a lot of people talk about enough. And just, I love the way that he attacked down the field in that game against Oregon. I don't think many people expected Oregon to put up, or Penn State to put up 37 points and hang with Oregon's offense like that. That was really impressive. That's good NFL tape. I think he's a second round guy. What about you?
I would probably say about the same. In a similar type of draft profile to like a Will Levis type, maybe not as volatile in terms of decision making coming out of Kentucky, but in terms of the big arm, running ability, both very talented players from a physical standpoint. I think Drew Aller is just going to be a bit of a project when it comes to developing him as a passer, just in terms of accuracy, and then the reading of coverage and like picking up blitzes and all the little details that come with playing the quarterback position at the NFL level.
Yeah, I mean, you got to love what he's put on tape this year. He's upped his passing yards, completion percentage, attempts, completions, touchdown to interception ratio is 25-2. Not really turning the ball over all that much. Really like what he put on tape. Really like what I saw in the Oregon game. I'm probably about mid to late second round is where I would be comfortable. But you got to love the body. 5'2", kind of in the Will Levis physical mold, if you will. And he's not necessarily playing with the most dynamic set of wide receivers that you've ever seen. And so he's had to really kind of, make plays and play off script a little bit in that offense, which I like. I think there's some really solid potential there, considering he's only 20 years old still. So,
and that's if he comes out this year.
Yeah.
There's a good chance he stays in college. But if I'm him, given how thin this quarterback draft is at the top, I would definitely consider it, because he looks to be a guy that could rise when it comes to draft, combine season, and pro days and all that type of stuff. I feel like scouts would really be foaming at the mouth watching this guy throw the football.
Absolutely. Yes, he's definitely one of those guys that Senior Bowl, whatever it might be, could definitely, take himself up around and the NFL draft with what he shows, in shorts and t-shirt, throwing the ball around the yard. But that's a great question. He's an interesting prospect. I think he probably, though, returns for next year, because I still think there is some meat left on the bone, like you said, with Quinn Ewers, that he could take it even higher next year. All right. My next question is going to be an NFL question as well. If you're betting right now, with 4 weeks left in the NFL season as we enter week 15, who are you betting on to win the NFC West? And for the team that you select, how far do you think that team can go in January in the playoffs?
Well, to look at it right now, the Rams are sitting at 7-6, 49ers at 6-7, and then the Seahawks at 8-5. So right now the Seahawks have that advantage. Their defense is playing much better, and it kind of feels like they're not only hitting their stride defensively, but also just feels like because of the resurgence defensively for this franchise, their offense has become a lot more complementary as well, kind of fitting Geno into more of the, hey, give us one or two big plays a game, and we're just going to run the football and play defense. And that seems like much more of a realistic expectation for Geno Smith rather than having him play hero ball. So I really do like where Seattle is at right now. And it's hard for me to pick against them. It's just that the Rams have been so freaking good the last couple of weeks. It's just hard to know. You know what? Screw it. I am gonna pick Seattle. I'm gonna pick Seattle to win the NFC West. They already have a game lead, and I think they're playing really good football. My only follow-up would be like, has Seattle played LA yet? I'm not even sure.
So your pick is Seattle. How far do you think the Seahawks could go in January?
I think they could make it to the divisional round. They would most likely have probably the 4 seed off the top of my head.
Yeah.
I think NFC North, NFC East, NFC South. No, they would probably have the 3 seed above the NFC South team, and end up playing whoever's in that 6th spot, which could be like Green Bay or Minnesota. So I think if they win a playoff game, that would mean they exceed expectations. But it's most likely a wild card exit if they end up playing a Green Bay or Minnesota. I don't love that matchup.
Do you think it's about the same for the Rams? Do you view them kind of as a divisional round and out team, or do you think they have a higher potential to potentially get to the conference championship?
Yeah, I view the Rams a little bit better when it comes to the playoffs. I think with how good their offense is, they could beat anybody. And that was just on display yesterday, beating the Bills the way they did. There's questions about their defense, of course, but they rush the passer, which is kind of it's a requirement. If you don't have a good defense, you got to at least be able to rush the passer and get those negative plays from time to time. Get a sack here and there and be able to get off the field on 3rd down. And the Rams can do that. So when you put them up against the Eagles or the Rams, or not the Rams, the Eagles or the Lions or the Packers or teams like that, I could see them winning. I really could. So I could definitely see the Rams ending up in the NFC Championship game with a chance to go to the Super Bowl.
Here's my quick take on it. So my pick to win the division is going to be the Los Angeles Rams for a couple reasons, which I'll name in a minute. But in all likelihood, this is going to come down to Week 18, Seahawks, Rams in Los Angeles, because they play each other again. They have another matchup left on the schedule. But I looked at the 2 schedules for both teams. The Seahawks this week will host the Green Bay Packers, and then they get the Minnesota Vikings, 2 double-digit win, really good NFC North teams. In my opinion, in order for them to pull it off and win the division, they're going to need to at least split those games, and then they're going to have to win the last game of the season against the Rams in Los Angeles because they lost the first head-to-head matchup earlier on this season at home against the Rams in overtime. And so
that's right.
I think just because of the way the schedules shape up, with the Seahawks getting the Packers, the Vikings, the Bears on the road, and the Rams on the road, and the Rams getting the Niners, who I think they're going to beat, even though it's on a short week, and that can kind of get, playing out in San Francisco. I know it's not a long trip for them, but if the 49ers team that we saw on Sunday shows up, that could be a loss. But I think they could win that game. I think they're gonna beat the Jets. I think they're gonna beat the Cardinals. And so I like the Rams' remaining schedule a little bit more. And I do think I would favor them to beat the Seahawks at home with the way that Matthew Stafford has been playing with his receivers healthy. And I think what's the Florida State's pass rusher's name? Jared Verse, Braden Fisk, those guys have been really solid for their defense. I slightly favor the Rams, but I see it going either way. And really what it comes down to is I think that last game, January 5th. But I do agree with your point on the Rams, I think, having a little bit higher potential to, get to the NFC Championship game if things were to break their way matchups-wise. Not because I don't think Seattle can't win a playoff game. I just think you need I trust a guy like Matthew Stafford a little more than Geno Smith to go up against, Jared Goff and some of these other offenses in the NFC. So that's my thoughts on it. But I can see it going either way.
Right. And as good as this Seattle defense has been, it hasn't been elite just yet. I think there's another step to go for them, and that could happen next year.
Yeah. All right. You are up to ask a question.
All right. Next one. Let's see here. Okay. The all SEC teams came out yesterday. So of the Texas all SEC team selections, and I'll name them in just a second. Which selection surprised you the most, and who do you think got snubbed? So those names: first team, Kelvin Banks and Jahdae Barron; second team, Quinn Ewers, Anthony Hill, Gunnar Helm; third team, Andrew Makuba and Trey Wisner.
So I agree with Kelvin Banks and Jahdae Barron being first team. That's something we've said for the last month and a half. I was a little shocked to see that Anthony Hill only on second team. I think he needed to be on first team. Gunnar Helm made second team. I think I can make an argument for him to be first team, but I understand it. I can understand that a little more than I can Anthony Hill from a production standpoint. What really surprised me, though, was Quinn Ewers on second team. Quinn Ewers has had his very good moments when he plays at, his best. He's literally the best quarterback in college football from a efficiency rating standpoint. But his lows this year have been, from a quarterback efficiency standpoint, one of the, when he's at his worst this year, his floor has dropped, I think, from last year for a number of reasons. The injury factors into it. I think the inconsistency in the running game factors into it. I'm not blaming Quinn for all of the offensive inconsistencies for this Texas football team. There's obviously a ton there. Penalties, shooting yourselves in the foot. I also think Sark's play calling.
Receiver core. Yeah,
Sark's play calling in the red zone the last couple of weeks, I think, can be heavily criticized. But it's just I like stats because they take feelings out of it. And it just kind of tells the story. When he's not played well this year, he's been one of the worst quarterbacks, not only in the SEC, but in the country. It's a little surprised he is second team. He's having, from just a raw stat standpoint, still a pretty good year. He's a good quarterback. I think what probably that speaks to is maybe the lack of really good quarterback play in the SEC this year. Lenora Sellers was first team. I didn't even look who was third team. But if you're just asking me who had the better year, Jackson Dart or Quinn Ewers, I would take Jackson Dart. If you're asking me who's the better player, Jalen Milroe or Quinn Ewers, I'm riding Jalen Milroe. I was just a little surprised. Nothing against Quinn. I wasn't expecting him to be second team, but good for him. And then from a snub standpoint, the obvious one is Michael Taff. He grades out in terms of PFF literally right up there with Travis Hunter and John A. Barron, who's going to win the Thorpe Award. This kid has made plays for Texas all year long. Just put on the tape. It's not hard to see. He earned it. I think he should have at least been third team. You cannot tell me there are 16 defensive backs in the SEC this year that have played better than Michael Taff has this year. You just can't. I'll never agree with that. And then in terms of others that maybe could have made the team, I mean, outside of that, you could argue a Manny Muhammad, but I'm not, super tilted on over that. I think maybe a Matthew Golden with his production so far this year may have deserved some consideration, but really the main one for me was Michael Taff.
The one that pops in my mind as well is Colin Simmons.
Yeah.
But obviously he's a freshman and he gets limited snaps, so I kind of get it. He's going to get a lot of the freshman accolades there, so you can kind of understand that, I think.
Yeah. And the other kind of surprise was Trey Wisner, but, he's 188 yards away from having a 1,000-yard season. And he didn't start until a couple weeks ago. So I think that's pretty impressive. And I honestly can't name a ton of backs out of the SEC this year that were super great, but maybe I'm overlooking some. I don't know.
Yeah.
All right.
It definitely seemed like all the backs we thought were going to be really good kind of had injury issues. So
yeah. All right. Well, that was a good question on your end. All right, I'm going to ask you this question because there were some comments made by – did you see the comments made by A.J. Brown post-game after their 22-16 win over the Panthers this past weekend, talking about how the passing game needs to be better? Well, since people are talking about it, especially in Philadelphia, this is my kind of overreaction or not question. Is this an overreaction or not an overreaction? The inconsistency of the Eagles' passing attack, specifically Jalen Hurts, will prevent them from winning the NFC over the Detroit Lions. Overreaction or not an overreaction?
I think if you're looking at the Eagles and you're looking to point out flaws, and I say flaws very lightly there because they're a very well-rounded team, but if you're looking at a weak point, it would probably be that. And I would say it's a combination of Jalen Hurts and also a combination of just the simplicity of this offense. It just kind of seems like they go to a lot of vanilla concepts that, stuff that you run in high school football, just really simple concepts and concepts that the defenses can kind of predict based on their formation and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I in all honesty, to put it bluntly, I do think if the Eagles were to lose to the Lions in the NFC title game, that would probably be the reason why. And I also just kind of think the reason I say yes is also because the Lions secondary being as good as it is as well. So if they were playing a different team, like say maybe the Rams, I wouldn't be as concerned about it. But with how good the Lions secondary is, I definitely do think it could be an issue.
I agree. I don't think that's an overreaction. Now, you also have to look at the rest of their body of work with their running game and that defense, which has a big part to do with, what is it now, a 10-game winning streak or something like that. But there's definitely, as of right now, where things stand, a limitation on how dynamic I think that passing game can be. I think schematics plays a part. I think Jalen Hurts also has some responsibility. And then, there are, football is a team sport. So there are probably other things behind the scenes they're trying to get worked out. But I do think in a matchup against Detroit, you're going to have to score. You're going to have to score some points. And I don't know that you can do that by just pounding the rock, on what has been a pretty good defense so far this year. So I think that if there's going to be one thing for this version of the Eagles that maybe prevents them from winning the NFC, that might be it. But I'll pass it out to you for your next question.
All right, for my next question, it's a little similar to your Eagles question, actually. It's a reaction to a quote from the Josh Pate College Football Show, which we both listen to on a regular basis. Specifically, his comments on the Texas-Georgia game, specifically on Texas. Basically, the point that he made, he mentioned that he expected going into the second half to have a backup versus backup game at some point in the second half, and it didn't come into fruition. He mentioned that he was a bit shocked by that. And he also mentioned that moving forward, Texas has to involve Arch Manning more into their offensive game plan to win a national title. So two different statements there, but do you agree? Do you disagree?
Well, I agree with the second part. I think in order for this Texas offense and this Texas team, from what we've seen from Quinn Ewers since he returned from his oblique injury and now dealing with this ankle injury, this ankle sprain, I do think they need to involve Arch Manning in some different sub packages in this offense. Probably, in my opinion, 8 to 12 plays per game at a minimum to win a national championship. Because even if you don't believe Arch is a better quarterback right now than Quinn Ewers is right now, and even if you believe that Arch Manning is going to be a better quarterback in the future than Quinn Ewers has been or maybe will ever be, because I think the expectation for Arch Manning is that when he comes out, he will be in conversations to be the number one pick in the NFL draft.
Right.
Quinn Ewers right now isn't anywhere near that for a lot of reasons, some of which aren't his fault. But I do think Sark, especially down in the red zone, is where I think it can maybe benefit them the most. Because in that Georgia game, Texas had no problem moving the ball inside the 20s for most of that. I mean, it really came down to some missed kicks by Bert Auburn. We talked about the special teams last week, and I'll continue to harp on that as we go into the transfer portal. And I think Texas is going to go after a kicker and a punter, but that's besides the point. It was really the red zone where they kind of got bogged down, shot themselves in the foot with penalties. The play calling wasn't great, and Quinn wasn't good. I think they need Arch Manning for 9 to 12 plays per game and kind of read option with the option to maybe throw a couple of times, moving the pocket, moving the launch point to try to give the defense something else to think about down there. Because whatever they've done in the red zone the past couple of weeks just hasn't really, both from a Quinn standpoint and a play calling standpoint, it hasn't been good. The only red zone touchdown I remember from the A&M game was the Arch Manning run. I believe that Jaden Blue pass was outside the red zone. So, and beside that, like when they got down in the red zone, Quinn threw a pick six and he fumbled. So Quinn hasn't been great down there. I think Arch Manning can give the defense another thing to think about. You can utilize his legs and you can kind of move the pocket with him. You can make throws outside the pocket. You can run little read options with the option to throw. I agree with that part. I do think they're going to need him to elevate this offense to go win a national championship, even though I don't really think they're going to need him to beat Clemson or Arizona State. I do think when you get down to the nitty-gritty in the semifinal and the national championship, against an Oregon or an Ohio State, that's when you're really probably going to need something like that. The first part, though, expecting it to be backup against backup in the second half, I couldn't actually disagree more, just because if you follow Texas football, and you have followed Texas football for the last 3 years under Quinn Ewers, and I guess the past 2 years, going back to when Arch Manning got to campus, we all know Sark is going to ride or die with Quinn Ewers. And so I was not expecting them to bench Quinn and go to Arch, even though Josh is probably right that probably would have, I do think if it was Arch instead of Quinn in the second half, Texas probably wins the game. But at the same time, expecting that to happen just seems kind of disingenuous to what we know about Steve Sarkisian and his belief in Quinn Ewers.
Right. Yeah, I 100% agree with you on that part. Really, really both, honestly. And I do think there's something to be said about even outside the red zone, just Arch jumpstarting the run game in general. I mean, I think Texas averaged like 1.3 yards per carry against Georgia, and then 1.1 in the first matchup. So just the run game in general just needed a boost. So having him be more involved, it's not a option anymore. It seems like more of a requirement. And I also think in order for this run game to be as good as it can be, we need Jaden Blue to, for lack of a better phrase, get his shit together. He's a ultra talented back, and we see that every time he gets the ball. In that Georgia game, he got the ball out of the backfield, made a guy miss, got first downs, and that was really the only time we saw him. But if he's able to earn the trust of this coaching staff again, which I don't know if that will happen, but I feel like they might be forced to give him another chance. I really do.
Yeah, if you're not going to go to him, you need to go to Jarrett Gibson.
Right.
Because
you need juice.
The only issue with that is like the first time he was put in that, what was that, the Kentucky game when all those fumbles were happening in the second half. First time he was put in the game, he put the ball on the ground. Now, went out of bounds, but he still put the ball on the ground. So I think this Texas coaching staff, just knowing what they know about Trey Wisner and that he's had the least amount of problems holding onto the ball, he's probably going to continue to get the bulk of the work. Because really, the run game since the bye week, since Vanderbilt, right, coming out of that bye week after the Vanderbilt game, the run game has been much improved.
Definitely.
Going to more Trey Wisner. Outside of the Georgia game, the Georgia defense is probably more, I guess, it's disingenuous to not credit that Georgia defense in the way that they've played the Texas run game in the first two matchups, because that's really what won them the game. What did they have this game? Like, they still had double-digit tackles for loss. They had 6 sacks. Like, they just live in the Texas backfield the first two matchups. But I do think, going back to the point, some of those Arch Manning zone reads, getting him outside the pocket, running with the quarterback, kind of like we saw Gunnar Stockton do when he came in, a changeup which the Texas defense I don't think was ready for, could help that and kind of take some pressure off the offensive line in a way. Because for whatever reason, I just don't think the Texas offensive line has been able to match whatever Kirby Smart and that Georgia defense comes ready to fist fight with Texas. I mean, their physicality up front is just on a different level. Yeah, I mean, it's stunning to see because Texas faced NFL athletes in that A&M game in a hostile environment, and they manhandled that A&M defensive line. Nick Scourton and Shamar Stewart, two guys on that Texas A&M defensive line, both have declared for the NFL draft already, and both are going to be first or second round picks. Georgia has those same caliber players, but for whatever reason, the Texas run game just didn't operate as well. So credit to the Georgia defense, but Arch Manning being more involved absolutely needs to happen. And if it doesn't happen and Texas fails to reach a semifinal, that's
Conversations need to be had. Let's just say that.
I like Sarkisian, but that's not going to sit well with the Texas fan base.
No.
All right. Okay, so it's my question, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Speaking of Texas, I'll just ask you this question. We know the matchup, first round matchup of the college football playoff for the Longhorns. They lose the Georgia game, so they will be playing an extra game to try to win a national championship. But they do get the 5 seed. They did get the 5 seed ahead of Notre Dame and ahead of Penn State. Some people disagree with that. Some people are fine with it. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. But my question for you is the most intriguing storyline of the Clemson at Texas round 1 matchup in the college football playoff. Is it Cade Klubnik, a Westlake High School kid, returning to Austin to face off against Quinn Ewers, a Southlake Carroll, Texas high school kid, in a state championship rematch back from 2020 when Cade Klubnik and Westlake defeated Southlake Carroll in that state championship game? Is it Andrew Makuba facing his old team in the Clemson Tigers? Or is it another storyline that I haven't mentioned? What do you think is the most intriguing storyline of this first round matchup as we kind of start to look ahead towards the playoff?
I actually think it's a different storyline. The storyline that pops into my head is Dabo Swinney going to ultimately win the war in this whole can he win without using the transfer portal stuff? And, you know, the conversation around him just a few months ago when they got smoked by Georgia, it was, how can Clemson keep doing this? They can't, keep Dabo much longer if he stays stubborn like this, blah, blah, blah. And here they are in the playoff with the chance to reach a semifinal, obviously on the road playing in Austin. It's going to be a big challenge. But you look at the way this team is playing, and you got to give them an outside chance, I would say. So it's like, can Dabo beat a high-level roster that one of the premier programs that uses the transfer portal the most in the Texas Longhorns?
Yeah, I do think if Clemson wins this game on the road in Austin over what has been a top 5 Texas team for basically the entirety of the season, ever since beating Michigan, if he can win this game and then beat Arizona State, get to a semifinal, they would be significantly outplaying the expectations for this Clemson team and their seed line. They're a 12 seed. They're the last team in this college football playoff. They get to a semifinal and play an Oregon or an Ohio State or a Tennessee, maybe even, I don't know who else they would maybe play there, Arizona State. I think that would quiet a lot of the noise, because if you get to a semifinal, then I think that's when you're really competing for a national championship. But I do think some of the noise will still exist, because I think the point a lot of people are making with that is the standard at Clemson with what Dabo has done there, winning 2 national championships. What do people expect? Fair or not, they expect national championships because of what he's done in the past. I do think there will still be some noise to take you over the top if they were to make a semifinal but lose. To take you over the top talent-wise from a roster standpoint, you got to supplement through the portal. But this could be a significant, in your face to the media if Clemson and Dabo are able to pull this off in Austin. I think the quarterback storyline would be the one I'd probably say, but I mean, both are really fascinating.
Both are very, very interesting.
All right, moving on. You're up.
All right, next question. Another Texas question. I think the last question kind of leads into this one in a way. What would you consider successful? What would you consider a success for Texas in the college football playoff? And in addition to that, what would you consider to be a failure from now into the postseason? How far should Texas go?
I think it's the same answer. Bare minimum to be considered a successful season, in my opinion, the bare minimum Texas needs to do is they have to be in the national semifinal, whether against Oregon or Ohio State or Tennessee. They have to be in Atlanta for that national semifinal, back where they were a year ago, right? Basically, in the national semifinal, because I think you can make the argument this team, especially from a defensive standpoint, is better than last year's team. I do think they need to beat Clemson as a double-digit favorite at home, and they need to absolutely beat Arizona State. They're a great story. I love what Kenny Dillingham has done. He deserves all the credit in the world for being picked last in the Big 12 for some weird reason and winning the fucking conference. Excuse my language. That running back, Cam Scatterbu, he's on another level right now. Texas would certainly need to corral him in the run game to make sure they take care of business in that game. I love the quarterback, Sam Levitt. I think is pretty underrated. I think they've got some pretty nice weapons. But that Arizona State defense, I don't think is, just from a line of scrimmage standpoint, they're not matching up against Texas. They're just not. They're not blocking Colin Simmons. They're not blocking Alfred Collins. They're not blocking Vernon Bryan. They're not blocking Trade Moore. They're not blocking Anthony Hill. And I don't think Cam Scatterbu has seen a linebacker that's going to run his ass down like Anthony Hill and Leona LaFau will. And I don't think that Arizona State passing game is having as much success against this Texas secondary. So I think bare minimum, you got to beat Clemson at home, even if it's a close game. And Clemson's no pushover. You got to beat Clemson at home. Can't lose in the first round at home. That would render this season a complete failure. But at the bare minimum, you have to be in the national semifinal. Anything beyond that is a complete failure.
Right. Yeah, I would 100% agree. Given the track that this team now has to reach the semifinal, that has to be the expectation.
Yeah, and based on where they're seated and the draw that they have, and again, it's no shot at Arizona State, but that has to be the expectation. You can make an argument that it needs to be get to the national championship, but I'm going to sit with, just get to the national semifinal and see where things fall from there.
All right.
All right.
Second to last question now for you.
Yes.
To me.
Okay. Yep. All right. I'll just ask this question. So the past 4 weeks, I believe, Kirk Cousins and this Falcons offense has really struggled. We all know that. I think they're on a 3 or 4 game losing streak. They're now below 500, behind the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the standings in that division, I believe. What are the Buccaneers? 7-6, and the Falcons are 6-7. If I have that correct, you can fact check that for me. But if you are the Atlanta Falcons, I guess the GM or the head coach, Raheem Morris, how would you proceed at quarterback in the short term, meaning the rest of this season, and the long term, next year and beyond? Are you kind of more leaning towards throwing in Michael Penix Jr. right now to see maybe what you have there this season to get him some reps and move into next year, with an open mind? Or are you sticking with Kirk Cousins for the rest of this year and then making a decision long term? Where do you sit on how you're going to handle the Kirk Cousins Michael Penix thing?
Well, this thing is shifting by the minute. I'll say this. I mean, Kirk Cousins over the last 4 games, I think has 0 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. And y'all can fact check me on that. I'm not 100% sure if that's completely accurate. But regardless, he's been really, really bad. And it just seems like not only that he's spiraling, it just seems like the entire team is as well. It just kind of has felt like the defense has taken a turn for the worse. The only bright spot being maybe just like the pass rush, I guess. But the secondary has, like, you would have argued the secondary was one of the strengths of this team going into the year. But that secondary has fallen apart. And now it just kind of seems like if I were the GM, I would probably just be like, hey, like, stick with Kirk until we're eliminated from playoff contention. And then from there, we can make a decision just based on, I mean, how ready you think Michael Penix is. And given, Michael Penix, where he was as a prospect, you would assume he's probably ready. I mean, I don't know what he's doing in practice. I don't know. I'm not there in the building, but that's the assumption. So throw Penix in there for a couple games to close the year, and then you go from there. Because you don't owe anything to Kirk Cousins. He's not, he wasn't a guy that you have to be loyal to because, he's been with the franchise for blah, blah, blah years. Like, none of that. Like, you really don't owe him anything.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation. Despite how bad it's been the last month, for the remainder of this season, I'm still sticking with Kirk Cousins. He counts $25 million against the cap this year. I still think he probably gives you the best chance to win. And I look at the remaining schedule. It's the Raiders, the Giants, the Commanders, and the Falcons. The Panthers. That's like all those games are still winnable if you can figure some things out. Now, what do the Buccaneers have left? I'm not exactly sure, to be honest with you. But the advantage that the Falcons have is that they beat the Buccaneers head-to-head both times they matched up this season. They beat him in that crazy, I think it was a Thursday night game, 36-30 back in early October. And then they also beat them in late October, 31-20 on the road. They have the head-to-head matchup. So all you would really need to do if you're the Falcons is take care of business, maybe win 3 out of 4 of these games, which I think are winnable. The hardest one, I think, being that Commanders game on the road in a couple of weeks, and hope that the Buccaneers lose one. Because if you can finish with the same record as the Buccaneers, say 9-8, which I think could be doable for the Falcons, you win the tiebreaker because you beat Buccaneers both times. That's the advantage I think the Falcons still have in this scenario. I would stick with Kirk right now and try to win these games coming up, however you need to. Try to right the ship because you still did give him this deal. Ride out the season, see how it goes, and then figure out the rest in the offseason. Maybe that's when you consider Penix, but that would be my take on it. What do the Buccaneers have left on their schedule? I'm interested to know.
Well, next week they go to LA to play the Chargers. And the following week they go to Dallas, a winnable game there. They play at home against Carolina, who's playing good football. And then they play at home against the Saints in the final week of the season. So
you're really
3 winnable games for Tampa Bay.
If you're the Falcons, you really need the Chargers to come through for you in a home game. And then you probably need to win out if you're the Falcons, being honest with you. But who gives you a better chance to win out? Is it Kirk Cousins or is it Michael Penix?
Yeah, Michael Penix, who's never had an NFL start, right? Like,
yeah.
It's still Kirk Cousins, and I still think there's more meat on the bone that they haven't unlocked with this running game, too. I still think Bijan Robinson, even though it's not as bad as it was last year with Arthur Smith, I still think he could be unleashed a little bit more.
Yeah, here's kind of another question real fast. If the Falcons, say, lose one of their next 2 games to the Raiders and the Giants, and the Buccaneers win a couple more, and you're really out of it kind of for the division the last couple weeks of the season, would you maybe try to give Penix a game at the end to see what's there? Or do you just ride it out with Kirk no matter what?
Well, given where the Raiders and the Giants are, their franchises, And given the fact that those two franchises are trying to lose right now, if they lose to one of those two teams, like, yeah, I'm going to Michael Penix. Like, I really do think it would take a colossal
Upset.
upset, like shit show. If
Yeah.
they were to lose one of those games, man, it would take a lot.
All right. Fair enough. I agree. All right. Last questions. Go ahead and fire off your last one.
All right. Last question for you. It relates to Minnesota and their quarterback situation. So if you're the Minnesota Vikings general manager, which I think his name is like Adafe something Mensa, I think.
Sounds about
Are
right.
you one signing Sam Darnold and letting JJ McCarthy sit a little bit longer, or two, letting Sam Darnold walk and starting JJ McCarthy?
I'm absolutely signing Sam Darnold. If I can get him on a 3 or 4 year deal, I'm signing Sam Darnold, letting JJ McCarthy sit a little longer. I think there are ways you can structure the contract potentially where maybe you have an opt out or a team option after year 2 of Sam Darnold, or maybe year 3. It can definitely be, I think, front loaded. So maybe you have an out in year 3 or year 4 if that's when you want to go to JJ McCarthy. But given that JJ McCarthy's still coming off that injury from earlier this year, and given the level for the most part that Sam Darnold has played at this year, and given that you have a ready-made win-now roster, I'm absolutely signing Sam Darnold if I can get him for the right deal. Why wouldn't you? You have a team and a coach that's ready to win. Yeah, you might lose Brian Flores, but like, you've got a team that can compete. And Sam Darnold's 27 years old still, and he's got loads of talent. So if it were me, considering the JJ McCarthy injury and everything else, how Sam Darnold has played this year, how he fits in this offense, I'm signing Sam Darnold. I think it's a no-brainer.
It really is. And the other factor that plays into it as well is the fact that JJ McCarthy isn't even 22 yet. He's 21 years old until January 20th. So
Exactly.
if you sign Sam Darnold to a 3-year deal, and if in theory Sam Darnold plays out that entire contract, he would still be under 25 years old. It's a win-win. You have Sam Darnold playing amazing football and a guy who's good enough to, lead you to the playoffs, hopefully for the next few years, and then JJ McCarthy waiting in the wings.
Yeah. Tell me if I'm off base, but I think that something like that Baker Mayfield contract, 3 years, $100 million, I think would be perfect for the Vikings and Sam Darnold. What do you think about that?
Definitely. I mean, if you sign him for 3 years, you end up with a 30-year-old Sam Darnold, and if it goes really well, then maybe you re-up him, and then if not, then you just let him go. That's really it.
Yeah, you can re-up him and use J.J. McCarthy potentially as trade bait. I'm sure with the amount of NFL needy quarterback teams out there are teams that would probably take a chance on J.J. McCarthy if you wanted to continue with Darnold in a couple of years. But I think for right now, it absolutely has to be Sam Darnold, going back to our original point.
Right.
All right, last question of the show. This is going to be a fun one. I thought of this just doing some reading on what the fuck is going on in Chicago. Things were ugly on Sunday. What was the first half yardage for the Chicago Bears on Sunday? I heard it was like 4 yards. What was it? It was bad, whatever it was. Anyways, we know they need a head coach. So my question for you is, if you were a head coaching candidate, I guess, would the Chicago Bears front office dysfunctionality, all this stuff about the CEO, Kevin Warren, and Ryan Poles, the relationship there is kind of, from an outside perspective, viewed in certain ways. Would all this dysfunctionality potentially deter you from taking that head coaching job? Or is the talent and the quarterback and the roster too good to pass up on?
Well, It depends on the perspective you're coming from. For the sake of this question, let's just say I'm Ben Johnson.
Okay.
If I'm Ben Johnson and I've already turned down a multitude of different offers over the last couple of years, I'm looking at it like I don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, man.
Yes.
I
I agree.
don't. Like, no,
Yeah.
no. Like, Caleb Williams, I believe in him. I think he's going to be a really good quarterback. But I think right now, Chicago needs a culture hire. Like, screw the offensive guru stuff, the defensive guru stuff. Like,
I think they need Mike
go
Vrabel.
get Mike Vrabel and just learn how to just be hard-nosed and tough.
That's what that city has been. That's what their football history is. It's not it's just never been a quarterback centric franchise. Even when they were, good and winning Super Bowls, it's always been tough, hard-nosed, good defense, like run the football, windy city, cold, windy weather. That's what the Bears are. And look, you have the quarterback. That's great. I think you need Mike Vrabel, who a culture builder, who has proven success both as a player in the NFL and as a head coach. Back with Tennessee when he took Ryan Tannehill to an AFC Championship game, a consistent, winner, culture builder that will at least, get things right, going in the right direction with the talent on that roster. I think you need someone like that rather than someone. I think this Bears job with the whole Ryan Poles and Kevin Warren situation up top, it's just too. I think it'd be a little bit too big, even as bright as Ben Johnson is, and as bright as maybe one of these other names could be, younger, innovative offensive names could be.
Yeah, Liam Cohen or Gary Kubiak.
Yeah, exactly. It's nothing against those guys, but for your first head coaching job, a place like Chicago, given their history the past couple of years with head coaches, the Matt Eberflus situation, for example, just not a situation I would touch with a 100-foot pole. No way.
Nope. The other part of the Mike Vrabel thing is he left Tennessee because he wanted more control over the roster, and Tennessee's owner didn't want to give it to him. So if he goes to Chicago, is he going to ask for the same thing, and will Chicago give that to him? Is another part of it. So there's a lot to that, but I do think Mike Vrabel or Brian Flores would be my top two candidates for that job if I were the Bears.
I would agree with you. Okay. We've come to the end of Gut Check. Hope you guys enjoyed it. That's most likely kind of what it will look like the next couple weeks. We have shorts posted over on our Instagram. We'll have those on our own social media feeds. You can find it on my Instagram. You can find it on Emmy's Instagram. You can find it on the Raw Prospect Podcast Instagram feed. We're going to be posting a couple of those pretty consistently from each episode on a variety of topics, college football or NFL, depending on what the situation calls for. Follow us on Twitter. We'll be retweeting the show there. I'm at Michael_Ween1 and Emmy's, I think, at Emmy.Nixon, correct?
Yes. And then on Twitter, I'm Emmy_Nixon.
Okay, there you go. And then we will have a show like this once per week in the new era of the Raw Prospect Podcast. So, Emmy, do you have any parting shots before we head out of here tonight?
Well, one thing, in the coming weeks, we'll be kind of deciding on a day to do this. And so far, we've done it one on Friday, one on a Tuesday, and we're going to kind of test different things out with our schedules and kind of see what sticks. So in the next few weeks, expect our episodes to kind of vary in terms of different days in the week. But starting 2025, we're going to look to have a set day each week to post this content for y'all. So keep an eye out for that.
And one more thing. Keep an eye out for every once in a while some supplementary content on our Patreon. the hot stove from a baseball standpoint is going pretty wild and nutty right now. I'm sure you guys saw the Juan Soto deal that broke the internet, and there are deals going down right now that are interesting. So you could see before the end of the month a baseball centric discussion, maybe on Patreon. If I'm solo or not, you could see that. Every once in a while, there will be some supplementary content over there potentially. So
Basketball,
keep an
golf,
eye out.
F1,
Yeah,
anything we feel like talking about that's not football.
keep an eye out for that. But the Juan Soto stuff and the free agency stuff in baseball certainly, I think, could potentially show up there sooner rather than later. So go ahead and keep an eye out for that. But that's going to do it for tonight. Thank you guys for listening. Make sure you like and subscribe, and share it with your friends. We greatly appreciate it. I'll let Emmy sign us off.
Definitely. Yeah. Until next time, guys, take care. Peace out.
Peace.